The most dangerous mistake in investing is not buying the wrong stock. It is building your life on the wrong kind of business. That mistake ruins people slowly. A man can spend 30 years inside an industry that looks respectable, works hard every day, serves real customers, pays bills, and still wake up one morning to discover he never owned anything durable. He owned motion. He owned effort. He owned a place in a competitive knife fight, but he never owned a moat. I learned that lesson long before I had any right to understand how valuable it would become. When I was still a boy in Omaha, I spent time around my grandfather Ernest Buffett's grocery business. A grocery store looks solid when you are young. Shelves are full. People come in every day, cash moves across the counter. Everyone needs food to a child. That looks permanent. It is not permanent. One afternoon I noticed another grocer standing in the aisle longer than an ordinary customer would. He owned a small store in town. He was dressed well enough. He had the look of a man trying hard to appear settled. But he was studying the prices the way a desperate man studies an exit. My grandfather looked at him, then looked at me, and gave me a lesson I did not forget. He said that when a grocer has to cross town to compare flour prices, the trouble is already deeper than the flour. At the time I did not understand the full implication. I thought price competition was just part of business. Later I learned that in some industries, price competition is not a passing inconvenience. It is the whole economic destiny of the business. 2 months later that man's store was gone. Nothing theatrical happened. No fraud, no scandal, no exotic catastrophe. A bigger store came in with lower prices, broader selection, and better parking. That was enough. The small operator could not charge more because customers would leave. He could not cut much lower because the margins were already thin. He did not lose because he worked less hard than the next man. He lost because the economics of the industry left him exposed. A business where anyone can open next door, undercut you, and train customers to treat your product like a commodity is not a business with much future protection. That was my first clear lesson in moats. A business without a moat may survive for a while. It may even produce pleasant years. But over a long enough stretch, success invites competition, and competition in a bad industry turns effort into exhaustion. That one truth saved Charlie and me from a tremendous amount of trouble. People often ask me what changed my results the most. They expect me to say balance sheets, discounted cash flow analysis, or some clever trick with numbers. Numbers matter, of course, but the more important discovery was simpler. 99% of businesses are mortal in a practical sense, not because civilization ends, because most businesses do not possess durable protection. They are too easy to imitate, too exposed to pricing pressure, too dependent on fashion, cheap capital, or management heroics. The world rewards them for a while and then replaces them. Look around any room filled with investors and ask them which companies felt invincible 20 years ago. A surprising number no longer matter the way they once did. Some vanished, some shrank, some were technologically bypassed, some became shadows of themselves. That is not strange. It is normal. The market's default setting is impermanence. That is why permanence is worth so much. Charlie and I did not spend our best years trying to identify every future sensation. We spent them trying to identify the few kinds of businesses that would still be economically important long after the latest excitement had become tomorrow's scrap heap. That is a very different pursuit. You stop asking, what is hot? You begin asking, what is hard to dislodge? You stop asking, how fast is it growing this quarter? You begin asking, what protects the economics if the world turns ugly, if competition intensifies, if capital gets scarce, if management changes, if fashions move on? That is owner thinking. And if you think that way long enough, a pattern emerges. There are only a small number of business categories where human nature, economic structure, and time combine in a way that creates extraordinary durability. I do not mean businesses that feel exciting for 12 months. I mean businesses that become more valuable because time deepens the moat instead of eroding it. Those are the businesses I have always wanted. The first kind of business I trust is insurance. Most people misunderstand insurance because they look at the surface and miss the engine. On the surface it looks dull. Premiums in, claims out, lots of actuarial tables, lots of regulation. No glamour. Fine. I have never needed glamour. What matters to me is the structure. Insurance, run well, gives you something one almost never gets in business. Other people hand you money first. You may not have to give much of it back for years, sometimes not at all. That gap is one of the finest financial arrangements in the world. The public usually thinks insurance companies make their money because premiums exceed claims. That matters, certainly. Underwriting discipline matters tremendously. If you are a fool and you write too much bad business, you will destroy yourself no matter how clever your spreadsheets look. But the truly elegant part of insurance is float. Float is money that does not belong to you permanently and yet can be used by you for a long time. If a policyholder gives you a premium today and the claim, if it comes, arrives much later, you have funds in your hands during that interval. Those funds can be invested. If the underwriting is sound, sometimes you are effectively being paid to hold the float. That is a marvelous arrangement. There are not many businesses where society voluntarily sends you capital in advance because it is afraid of uncertainty. That is what insurance is really built on. Human fear of loss, fear of death, fear of accident, fear of fire, fear of litigation, fear of medical disaster. Fear is ancient. Fear does not get technologically disrupted. As long as people own things, love people, drive cars, operate businesses, and try to protect their future, there will be insurance. That is what I mean by durability. A business built on a permanent human need begins life with a different kind of advantage. I saw this clearly in Geico. Wall Street once treated insurance the way children treat oatmeal, healthy perhaps, but not interesting. That was their mistake. What looked slow was actually one of the finest economic structures in America. Geico did not need to become sexy. It needed to stay rational. It focused on economics that made sense. It did not write every piece of business it could find. That is what undisciplined insurers do. They chase volume, they cut prices, they flatter themselves with market share while quietly buying catastrophe. A smart insurer would rather write less business than dumb business. That principle is one of the most important principles in capitalism. Volume that destroys economics is not growth. It is self-harm in a necktie. The great insurance company understands selection. It understands risk. It understands that a premium written at the wrong price is not revenue. It is deferred regret. When you pair that discipline with the structural gift of float, something beautiful happens. You gain investable capital year after year. You gain it at scale. You gain it from a human need that does not go away. And if you place that float into wonderful assets or wonderful businesses over a long period, the compounding becomes extraordinary. That is why I have always admired insurance. It is not exciting in the childish sense. It is exciting in the adult sense. It endures, it produces, it scales, and if run with discipline, it creates a moat that time can actually deepen. The second kind of business I trust is branded consumer products with genuine pricing power. This is where many people become confused because they think a brand is just a logo or advertising or awareness. That is too shallow. A true brand does something very specific in the mind of the buyer. It reduces uncertainty. It simplifies the decision. It says, you already know what you will get. That is immensely valuable. When Charlie and I bought See's candies, the numbers alone did not tell the whole story. The accounting could never fully capture what lived in the mind of the customer. If a man in California wanted to bring home a box of chocolates on Valentine's Day, there was one name that meant safety. One name that meant he was not taking a social risk. He did not have to conduct a product committee in his own head. He did not have to wonder whether he was being cheap. He did not have to test 5 brands and gather data. He bought certainty. That is what a strong brand sells. A strong brand sells reliability of outcome. That reliability creates pricing power. Now, pricing power is one of the most underappreciated wonders in the entire business world. A company that can raise prices modestly without injuring demand owns one of the finest machines in capitalism. You do not need heroic growth if you can nudge price upward year after year while keeping the customer. You do not need gigantic capital expenditures if the customer returns out of habit, trust, and emotional association. You do not need to win a fresh war every quarter if your position in the buyer's mind has already been built over decades. Seas taught us that. The business did not require us to reinvent the planet. It did not need to spread to every corner of the world at any price. In fact, one of the great errors in business is believing growth is automatically noble. Growth that destroys economics is not noble. Growth that stretches you beyond your moat is often stupidity disguised as ambition. Seas had a moat in the West Coast consumer's mind. We respected that moat. We did not vandalize it in the name of empire. That discipline is part of intelligence too. Many managers cannot resist expansion because expansion flatters the ego. I have seen more capital destroyed by ego than by recession. A business with real brand power does not need to chase every map. It needs to deepen what already works. That is how Coca-Cola became one of the greatest businesses in the world. People like to talk about the secret formula as though the economics of Coca-Cola are hidden in a vault. The formula is not the moat. The moat is the association built in the minds of billions of people. Refreshment, familiarity, memory, ritual, trust. I once said that if you gave me an immense pile of money and told me to unseat Coca-Cola globally, I would not know where to begin. Not because other beverages cannot exist. Of course they can. But because replacing that mental position is not a matter of one good advertising campaign or one clever product tweak. You are fighting accumulated trust. You are fighting habit at planetary scale. That is not easy. In fact, it is close to impossible. That is why a genuine brand can be more durable than many factories. Factories can be copied. Products can be reverse engineered. Trust that has occupied the human mind for a century is harder to replace. The market often undervalues that because the accounting statement cannot put the entire emotional franchise under one clean line item. But the owner should know it is there. I like businesses that sell certainty into ordinary life. People buy Tide because they believe it will work. They buy Coca-Cola because they know what it tastes like before they open it. They buy Gillette because they trust the outcome more than they trust the unknown. It is not that consumers are fools. It is that decision friction has a cost, and brands reduce it. That reduction has economic value. The third kind of business I trust is essential infrastructure. Now here again, the modern world likes to get cute. People talk as though infrastructure is old. Fine. Old is not a criticism. Breathing is old too. The fact that something is old may be the very reason it still matters. Railroads, pipelines, transmission networks, ports, certain logistics systems, pieces of communication backbone. These are not passing fads. They are the skeleton of commerce. They exist because society needs throughput. Goods must move. Energy must move. Signals must move. Water must move. Waste must move. The economy is not a video game. It is a physical system layered beneath a digital story. Infrastructure businesses often have two qualities I adore: huge replacement cost and network advantage. Once something enormous, capital-intensive, and socially embedded has been built, the world does not casually duplicate it. That is one reason railroads appeal to us so much. People laughed when Berkshire bought BNSF. They thought rail belonged to the 19th century and that the future belonged to whatever happened to be shiny that week. That is a common misunderstanding. The future is often built on top of old systems rather than instead of them. If you want to move massive freight across a continent efficiently, rail still matters. In many situations, it matters enormously. The right railroad network is not just tracks. It is right-of-way, land access, terminals, relationships, geography, and enormous embedded capital. The replacement cost is staggering. The political difficulty of recreating it from scratch would be almost laughable. That is what makes it valuable. The moat is not a patent. The moat is the reality that no sane rival is going to replicate the full system. This is what I mean when I say monopoly is often a wonderful thing for owners. if obtained honestly through structure rather than deception. A natural monopoly is not the same as a villain. It is an economic fact. Some industries work best with one or a few efficient networks. You do not want 5 rail lines laid on top of each other to prove a point about competition. You want one efficient system moving freight economically. If you own a good portion of that system, you own something rare. And rarity tied to necessity is a beautiful thing. The same logic extends far beyond rail. Any business where replacement cost is enormous, regulation is meaningful, and the service provided is unavoidable deserves a close look. A lot of fortunes are built not on glamour, but on ownership of unavoidable pathways. People forget that. They want exciting products. I want toll roads in disguise. The fourth kind of business I trust is utilities and regulated networks. This is another place where ordinary investors sometimes get bored and walk away. They should be more careful. A utility is not just a dull company sending out monthly bills. At its best, it is an embedded economic franchise. If you live in a region and there is one practical provider of electricity, gas, or certain forms of water service, then the customer relationship is not up for endless auction every Friday morning. That stability has tremendous value. Now, utilities are not a free lunch. They are regulated, their returns are constrained. Politics matters, capital expenditures matter. The public can get annoyed. All true. Still, a regulated monopoly with a reasonable allowed return is often far better than a competitive business that must wake up every day and fight for its own oxygen. There is peace in structure. I like businesses that can reinvest capital at sensible returns into systems society cannot do without. The public may yawn at a utility. Wonderful. Yawns are often a sign that a business is being judged by entertainment value rather than by owner economics. The grid is not optional. Homes need power, hospitals need power, factories need power, data centers certainly need power, and as the world electrifies more of modern life, the need does not it expands. That makes utility networks more interesting than many people realize. Not because they will double in a month and let someone boast on a message board, because over 20 years they can be engines of cash generation, regulated reinvestment, and astonishing durability. Durability, again, is the key word. I do not need every business to sprint. I need the good ones to endure. Now, the fifth kind of business I trust may be the most misunderstood of all. Membership retail and trusted low-margin distribution. This is where Costco becomes such a marvelous case study. Most people misunderstand Costco because they think the moat is low prices. Low prices matter. They are not the deepest moat. Trust is the moat. Costco does something that almost no retailer has the discipline to do consistently. It tells the customer, in effect, we are not going to exploit you just because we can. That promise, if honored for long enough, creates a very powerful bond. You pay the membership fee not just for access to products. You pay for the confidence that the game is not rigged against you. That is rare. Jim Sinegal understood something a great many executives never learn. A little less greed in the short run can create a far stronger economic machine in the long run. He capped margins in a way that looked almost stubborn to outsiders. The clever men of Wall Street kept wondering why Costco would not squeeze harder. They were asking the wrong question. The right question was, what happens when customers become so confident in your intentions that they stop second-guessing every decision? That is magic. The membership fee becomes nearly pure economics. The renewal rate becomes a report card on trust. The company can grow volume, increase purchasing power, improve price perception, and reinforce the cycle. That is a moat built from behavior. You cannot copy that overnight. Any fool can advertise low prices for a quarter. Very few can earn decades of confidence. This is why I say trust is one of the great underappreciated assets in capitalism. The world likes to price what it can count. It often underprices what must be felt. Trust has to be felt. Once it exists at scale, it can be unbelievably valuable. Customers come back. Suppliers take you seriously. Volume gives you leverage. Leverage gives you better buying power. Better buying power allows better value to the customer. The cycle strengthens itself. I adore businesses like that. Not because they are noisy, because they get stronger as reputation compounds. That is one of the best features a business can have. The more time passes, the more valuable the trust becomes. That is the kind of asset I want sitting underneath my future. Now, if you listen carefully, these 5 categories sound different on the surface. Insurance, branded consumer products, infrastructure, utilities, membership retail, different economics, different industries, different products, different customer relationships, yet the deeper principles underneath them are not different at all. That is what matters. The first principle is that monopoly economics, where obtained through real structure, are superior to open knife fights. A business that does not need to wake up every day, terrified of a new entrant, has a radically better future than one running naked in a commodity industry. The second principle is that trust and certainty are monetizable in a way most investors underestimate. If customers know what they will get, know they will not be cheated, and know the company sits in an unavoidable place in their life, that is an economic advantage. The third principle is that necessity is better than excitement. I do not care whether a business makes cocktail, party conversation sparkle. I care whether the world must keep paying it. Insurance is necessary. Transportation networks are necessary. Power is necessary. Certain branded goods become quasi-necessary because the customer no longer wants decision friction. Costco becomes semi-necessary to its members because the trust relationship itself is valuable. Necessity beats novelty over long periods. Novelty attracts competition. Necessity attracts renewal. The fourth principle is that time should deepen the moat rather than erode it. This is one of the most important tests in all of investing. Ask yourself what time does to the business. Does time increase customer trust? Increase network reach? Increase embeddedness? Increase switching costs? Increase habit? If yes, that is wonderful. If time instead increases the odds of obsolescence, commoditization, or competitive decay, be careful, a real moat tends to age well. That is one reason Charlie and I could sit so still. We did not confuse activity with intelligence. We found businesses where the passage of time itself was an ally. The fifth principle is patience. Now, patience sounds soft when people say it too casually, but real patience is a hard discipline. A great many intelligent people know what a good business looks like and still fail because they cannot sit through boredom, temporary undervaluation, public criticism, market cycles, or the emotional discomfort of looking inactive. That is not a small weakness. That is the whole game in many cases. I have watched brilliant people sabotage themselves because they needed to keep proving they were in motion. Meanwhile, the quieter owner of a truly strong business, sitting there like a man on a porch swing, let the economics do the work. Who became richer? Usually the patient man. The world praises brilliance more than patience, because brilliance is easier to dramatize. Patience rarely looks impressive in real time. It looks lazy. It looks obvious, only after compounding has already done the hard work. This is another reason I love moats so much. A moat makes patience more rational. You are not merely waiting with hope. You are waiting inside a structure that justifies waiting. That is the difference between patience and passivity. Passivity is drift. Patience is deliberate inactivity in the presence of good economics. Those are not the same thing. Now, if I were speaking to someone much younger, someone who still believes the next great fortune must come from the latest hot field or the noisiest technology, I would tell him something simple. The future will create new fortunes, of course, but the deepest fortunes are often built by owning businesses the future still cannot function without. That is the key. Technology changes surfaces. Human nature changes much more slowly. People will still fear loss. People will still need electricity. People will still value a merchant who does not cheat them. If you can find the businesses that stand at those intersections, you are no longer chasing fashion. You are aligning with permanence. I have always preferred permanence. It is easier to sleep next to. Now let me address one more thing. People sometimes hear a list like this and imagine the work is finished. It is not. Knowing the 5 categories does not free you from judgment. You still need to distinguish the wonderful insurer from the foolish one, the great brand from the decaying brand, the well-run utility from the badly run one, the valuable infrastructure network from the over-leveraged mediocre one, the trusted merchant from the one trying to imitate trust with coupons and slogans. Industry alone is not enough. What the right industry gives you is a better hunting ground. It increases the odds. That matters enormously. But it is not the whole story. I would still ask the same owner questions. Is management rational? Is the balance sheet sound? Are returns on capital attractive? Is capital allocation intelligent? Is the moat widening, stable, or shrinking? Does the valuation leave room for a sensible return? The old disciplines still apply. What changes is that you are asking those questions inside industries where the economics already have a chance to age well. That is a much better game than trying to rescue weak economics with cleverness. I have no interest in rescuing weak economics. The world is too full of people attempting exactly that. The better path is to buy strength where the structure deserves it. Now, when I think about my own life, I do not feel proudest of the moments when I predicted something exciting. I feel proudest of the moments when Charlie and I kept our heads clear enough to prefer something durable over something flashy. Durability is underrated by youth because youth is intoxicated by speed. That is, natural age teaches a different appreciation. When you have watched empires look eternal and then die, you stop worshiping what is merely impressive today. You start asking what is difficult to dislodge tomorrow. That is the real question. That is the question hidden underneath every great investment. Not how exciting is it? Not how fast is it growing right now? How likely is this business to remain economically important, defended, and cash generative when the noise of the current era has become old wallpaper? If the answer is very likely, then I am interested, very interested. That is how Charlie and I built Berkshire. Not with 100 constantly changing themes, with a few enduring ideas, applied repeatedly with more patience than the market thought reasonable. That is all simple enough to sound unimpressive, powerful enough to change a life. If I had to leave you with one final thought, it would be this. Do not spend your life chasing companies that need the future to be perfect in order to justify today's price. Spend your life studying businesses that can survive an imperfect future because their place in the economic order is unusually protected. That is what a moat is for. A moat is not there to make the annual report sound intelligent. It is there to protect your future compounding from the ordinary cruelty of competition. Find that, value it, pay reasonably for it. Then, if you are wise, sit still. A lot of the world's best wealth has been built by people who understood only a few great truths and had the temperament to hold them long after the crowd got bored. I admire that. I trust that. And if I were starting over today, I would still rather own a handful of businesses tied to fear, trust, necessity, embedded networks, and essential service than spend my life worshiping what happens to be fashionable on a given afternoon. That is not old-fashioned. That is simply how reality works. Reality may change its costume. Human nature does not change very much, and the businesses built on durable human nature are the ones most likely to outlive the rest of the parade. That is where I would put my money. That is where I did put my money, and that is still where I would look if I wanted capital that could survive long enough to become peace.